Well, good morning, everybody. I am very pleased to be leading this panel today for winter quarters with SD HISCON entitled From Maya to Modern, the Emerging Hobby in Latin America. And doubly pleased to be joined by these three gentlemen who are the exciting examples of what is happening with the Latin American hobby as it continues to grow and develop and evolve and become a new serious hub for historical simulation, conflict simulations. And all three of these gentlemen have been participants in the Zenobia process that occurred this last year. And so they'll have some interesting insight with that experience as well. We're joined today by Luis Salas, Wagner Silva, and Frederico Benitze, right? All right, I got it. All three of whom have been doing interesting work in historical game design, some of them just starting out, some of them with a little more experience. And we're going to cover today both their sensibility of what's happening in Latin America with the hobby, talk a little bit about their design work that they've just been completing through the Zenobia process, and discuss where things might head in the future. I should say that the notion for this panel happened because I had gone down to Mexico City for Mega XP, which is a very nice, very large convention in Mexico City. And I had been invited by DeVere, which is the largest publisher of all sorts of games. They really are kind of more of a Euro publisher than a war game publisher, but they publish a lot of GMT titles as well as some of their own that are in the conflict simulation space. And I had gone excited to be in Mexico, but sort of thinking that there would not be a lot of Mexican consim gamers or people who are really terribly familiar with Twilight Struggle there. And I found just the opposite. And it made me realize Latin America has really become an important place for growth in our hobby. There are a lot of great players. Of course, Latin Americans are well known for their warmth and hospitality anyway, so they're fun people to play games with. And it made me want to do a panel here for winter quarters that kind of highlighted what's going on there. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced by a car to these three gentlemen, and it made a perfect panel. So starting with Luis, tell us a little bit about yourself, the game that you were working on, and what country you're located in, and we'll proceed down the line.
Well, yes, for sure. My name is Luis Mario Salas. I am from Mexico, and the game I have been working on for the Zenobia Awards is called Silencio. And this is a game about cartel-related violence in modern Mexico. It's about all of the things that people go through and all the forced disappearances of people because of this violence. When I started working on the game, my focus was to do a war game in which I could portray what were how war affected on actual people, especially in this theme because it's such an important aspect to highlight. And nowadays, the way in which people have to sometimes flee their countries because of the violence that it's enacted upon them. We don't often see that side of the coin. So that's it. And I got second place on the contest, so I'm pretty excited about it.
As well you should be. That I know the competition was intense this year, and that's quite an accomplishment. Congratulations. Wagner?
Okay, I'm Fagner. I'm Brazilian. I just moved to Amsterdam. I live in Amsterdam like for 6 months, so still adjusting to Europe. Yeah, still dealing with I'm still missing the sun a lot. And yeah, I'm a
The
new game
strange,
designer. I don't
strange
have any.
sounds of the Dutch language.
Oh yeah. I am very like I live in Amsterdam. I'm very glad because of that because everyone speaks English because Dutch is very difficult trying to learn, but yeah. Yeah, it will take me some time to learn some Dutch.
For
So
sure, for sure.
I will keep the and there's an interesting thing about Brazilians that you'll find Brazilians everywhere in the world. So I met some Brazilians here, so sometimes I can practice. I can talk in Portuguese, so it's good. Yeah.
When
And
I was in Portugal last year. I think I met more Brazilians than I did Portuguese, honestly.
oh yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Make a lot of sense. And was my first time participating in Zenobia. Was a great experience. My game is about translation of scientific books. So it's a game about the history of science, specifically in the Middle East and North Africa during the Abbasid Caliphate. It's a team that in the past like 2 years, a few games are launched about this topic, but most games talk more about trading and the
Right.
territorial conflicts, and I'm focusing like in the research and translating in books. And this kind of is a big thing for me, like to look to history, but through this lens of how knowledge is built. So look to history not only by conflicts and yeah. So I'm this in this moment. I'm very glad to be part of Zenobia. I'm able to get to the final, so I'm really proud of the game and yeah.
Latin America was clearly dominating. That's fantastic.
Yes.
Well, I have a bunch of questions about your game. I think it's a super interesting topic, and I'm always excited to see designs approach history from a little bit of a different angle, not just tanks and panzers and the usual Poland, the usual stuff that we do. There's a lot more history to explore, and all of you have been doing exploring history in a little more of an offbeat way. Frederico?
Yes, so I'm Federico. I am originally from Uruguay, but I live for some years now in Switzerland, in Bern. I'm still not used to the sun. So Fagner, just so you know. Zenobia was a really amazing opportunity for me. I did my first design. I was always into board games, but I never thought I could design my own, and I more or less could. And my game is called Quilombo, and it's about communities of escaped, enslaved Africans mostly in colonial Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and it's pretty much a combination of like there is this like these people would escape and would go into the interior of the continent, like far from the coast where the colonies were initially. This is the 17th century, 18th century. And they would establish these communities, and of course they came from all over Africa, and also they had to interact with the natives. So the building up of these communities was what really interested me. So I wanted to simulate how to deal with this diversity and how you could generate a community that can survive. And of course, you have the military incursions from the Europeans that try to recapture the slaves. So you have these two elements, like a community building element and a military element that were mixed in the game. And it was an as I say, an amazing experience. I learned a lot thanks to the other people there and the mentors. That it's really, I felt like super fortunate to be able to do this, and I have a game like I have to keep working on it. I think it's too complicated right now, but it's already, you can already have a bit of fun with it. So I'm happy.
It's such an amazing narrative topic. It definitely, I'm excited to have games in that space dealing with, issues that are complicated to talk about. But you can express a lot of that narrative in ways more interesting in a game than you would just throwing a book at someone and telling them to kind of read this. Well, let's kick off with you for this first question. Then, Federico, also tell us a little bit about what was your first exposure to the hobby? Like, as someone from Uruguay, where did you first encounter modern board gaming? And then how would you describe the scene in your home country before you got to Switzerland, where I imagine there are a few more, they're more established hobby. Although Switzerland isn't exactly a thriving hub of board game designers.
I went from a small place to an even smaller place. But I played board games my whole life with family, etc. But it was mostly, Risk or clones of Risk, like local clones of Monopoly, etc. I started playing modern wargaming with a group of friends. First we were playing role-playing games like D&D, etc. And then as we started having a bit more money and etc., we could buy board games or import them. And then we established this club. We will rent a place for a whole night and play the whole night, like once a month or once every 2 months. And every time somebody would bring a new game, it would be like the event. And mostly it was Euro games, of course, but Twilight Struggle appeared, Path of Glory, the big ones started to appear. And that was my first contact with the console. And I was hooked, but it was difficult to find partners to play. Like most people would rather play, I don't know, Ticket to Ride or
sure.
And when I came here initially, I didn't find. I mean, it was mostly Euro that I was playing until the pandemic, to be honest, where I had to find people online to play, and I found that then you can play whatever you want. So I started playing more like coin games first, and I think Root was also like a
it's a nice it's a great bridge.
Exactly. Like I think first I played a bit of Root already here, and then through that, when I was looking online, I found this huge universe.
First birds and otters and whatever, and then you can do Andy and Abyss or whatever. Fair. Fagner, what about Brazil?
My experience was very similar to the Federico. I played like the classic cops in Brazil, and with my family, with friends. And in my teenage years, I play a lot of RPGs. So was one of these RPGs playing for friends and reading about RPGs book that I learned about the modern board games. So I started reading and trying to find people to play. And even in Brazil, we have some designers publishing normally very children mass market games, but a few of them sometimes could put a very light Euro modern game in the middle in the mass market. So I got some of these games, and then when I was working with a little more money, I started to import games. This is the thing that was like 15 years ago was the hard part, was because the importation. But nowadays is very, very, very easy to get games. We have a lot of publishers, and Asmodee bought a Brazilian company, so a lot of like newer titles are coming. The war games and historical games are not so popular, but we have like Pax Pamir, John Company published in Brazil. So, and they sell like, wow, it's not like big printing, but they are being sold in Brazil. And Devir published Twilight Struggle and other games for their catalog in Brazil too. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's helpful. And I mean, you have to have the games for people to be able to play. That is important. Yeah. And even in the early days, there were always a few crazy historical people. They would show up. Like I would notice on the early days of Board Game Geek, someone from Brazil or Colombia or something would be participating. But those are people with a lot of money and a lot of free time, and unfortunately, you can't build a hobby that way. You have to make the games accessible, both at a price point and preferably in their in Spanish and Portuguese, so that the translation issue is not a giant barrier. Luis, Mexico, our beloved neighbor to the south. No matter what you hear from Washington lately.
Well, on my part, I have also always liked board games, especially as a kid. I loved to play things like Ludo, or there was a game that's called Dungeon, or well, in Mexico, it was sold by Monte Carlo, and it was called Calabozo, la aventura de los anillos. And I really, really liked that one. And eventually I got to figure out that board gaming as a hobby existed. And I realized that in my city there are a few, just a handful of very active board gaming communities. So actually it was pretty nice to get to know people, to understand a little bit more about the hobby. And I have been able to go to a couple of the conventions here in Mexico. So it's pretty nice because conventions just like the Mega XP and the Rolla Game Expo in Guadalajara have like a bunch of indie publishers who are crafting very interesting ideas, and it really makes me feel like the board gaming scene in Mexico is really alive. I think it's not as big as in Chile, but it's going into that direction. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting you say Chile. That sadly, Chile is the only country I've been to in South America, and I need to get to more of them, clearly. But I was in Chile sometime in the early 2000s, and I was in Santiago and walked into a game store. It was a lot of Games Workshop, more like miniature stuff, but they had a very full selection of Euro games as well. And so I was like, oh, okay, Chile is actually in the hobby, basically. Turning a little more to kind of the topical questions involved in this kind of emerging school, with you guys being able to create designs about Latin American history, and in many ways, certainly in the United States and honestly for most of Europe as well, maybe less so Spain, you'll be introducing these historical topics to us. It's just not history that, Americans, to the extent that we cover Latin American history, it's our own mostly unpleasant history with Latin America, either invading Mexico or Cuba or, one of these things. This is about as deep as it gets, the Monroe Doctrine. But outside of that, there are a number of important wars that happen in South America that most Americans are blithely unaware of. And I think even most Europeans outside of maybe the Spanish also unaware of. But one thing we have in common is that we do struggle with colonial history and the racial component of it. And the American take might be different than Latin America's. And Federico, you have a game that sits right on a very sensitive subject in American discussions, like slavery, freed slaves, people going to reclaim them. These would be very hard topics for Americans to design around. And I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but they're this is a tough conversation. You're trying to sell a game on it. This is going to be, you have to walk into this very sensitively. So what's kind of your, given the focus of your design, what was your sense of what's taboo? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with the colonizers in this case? Are they villains as far as your narrative is concerned? Give us a rundown.
I mean, it's definitely there is this element of I am a descendant of European colonizers, like that. We never know exactly who was behind it.
Who, where, when, right? But somehow.
But mostly I'm a descendant of I'm of European origin, and therefore I don't want to tell a story that is not mine, or I don't want to speak for other people. But having said that, we do share, we have this pride, at least in Uruguay, of this resistance. Even though, maybe my grandparents or my great-grandparents were living in Italy while all this was happening, but we still have this kind of this was a resistance movement against really bad things, like some of the most tragic things that happened. And there is a pride on that. Even though maybe I'm not directly related by blood, there is really a pride. And in Uruguay, since we are an independent country, there is no slavery. That was really slaves would escape from neighboring countries because there still would be a slavery there and not in Uruguay. So we have really a history of being proud of okay, here it was a bit better, which, if you read how we treat natives, then
different story. Yes, of course.
It's always but I wanted to tell that story from the point of view of our pride a bit. So to say, okay, there was resistance to this very I would say it was clear or it is clear to me that the colonizers are playing the role of a villain. And even though, even then I decided to make them a player to play them because I felt okay, it's an important, sometimes it's good to play the role of the villain in a way and to see why you are doing the things that you're doing, or how, what were the economic or historical or social pressures that also led to this kind of decisions. And so I had a lot of it was a lot of heavy decisions. I think it's less. I think in the US, in America, it would be much more difficult. Even we have a bit of a less conflicted relation with that. I think the way that when I talk with my peers in Uruguay, or when I went to school and learned about this, that there was not so much this two points of view. There is only one point of view, and it's this was wrong. and we are proud of the people that resisted it. Like there is not like a people say, like there is not a second view from I don't know, the white people say no, but in fact, like I don't know, no, there is
Right.
nothing like that. And then this makes it a bit more straightforward, I would say. So that's for sure helped. But I still like, yeah, I try to read a lot, and I contacted professors that studied this, and yeah, some of them mostly in Brazil, where this is really a very big part of like, yeah, mostly the left governments have tried to really give this pride a place and like to these communities that some of them are still existing in some ways. Like, of course, they were hit hard, but there are like survivors from this.
Yeah, like a residual of that that experience.
And this is and yeah, I contact these people. I got some feedback, but yeah, it was really not like, yeah, the perfect thing would have been to go there and have like a real person-to-person conversation about how the game would be, how the game could best represent this story, and I couldn't do. But I'm of course, yeah, the game in a way is unfinished. No, it's like I have a playable prototype, but of course I want to keep improving it. And one thing in which I want to improve is this. It's like, how is this the right way to represent these people? Like, I really want to have some feedback from people. Sorry,
no, that's excellent. I appreciate that feedback, and in general, I think the best defense for anything that is sensitive historically is to tell the truth, and if you do that, you're 3/4 of the way through, and it sounds like that's what you've been trying to do. Wagner, you are not. You're doing something really offbeat. First of all, you're doing scientific history, which there's been a tiny handful of games about, and most of them don't take it that seriously, to be honest. There's a scientific theme on top of some game that's, a set collection or whatever. And not only are you doing that, you're doing it outside of your Brazilian experience and tying it back to this very important era of scientific discovery in the Arab world, which all of a sudden, as we discussed briefly, has, I don't know, it's generated a game or two, like people are putting it out, but we're still kind of dealing with the surface level. Tell me a little bit about why you were drawn to scientific history. Do you think that is, do you think that games about scientific history could be more accessible and more acceptable than games about military history, which seems to be what we like churning out in this space?
I think that's yes, I agree with you that that's a possibility. I have a lot of friends during like testing my game that are very interested in play the game because of the theme. Like, oh, it's about science, it's about, and they are more interested in that than like playing a game about some war that happened somewhere. So I think that is a very different approach. And I always very interested in science, and I really got in this topic almost random, like a YouTube channel that I follow that talk a lot about science, make a video about one scholars of this period, a Persian scholar, Al-Khwarizmi, mathematician, and I got like totally fascinated, and I think, okay, this could be a game, like that's this history could be a game. So I started to research and read some books, watch some more videos, and then I meet two Brazilian historians. One of them is specialized on this era, so it was really fun to. Yeah, it was amazing. Like a guy that stood like history of science in the Arab world. So yeah.
Yeah, lucky.
Yes.
A lucky, yeah, meeting for sure.
Providence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that for me, when I think about the history in Brazil, and being as a black man that don't know like my roots, and I don't know if my grandparents they are like from Nigeria, from Angola, so I have no idea where they come from. And but when we look to the history of science, you see a lot of knowledge, the roots in Africa. So a lot of in Africa and Middle East, and of course Asia too. But a lot of that come to the new world with the colonization are in fact like constructed upon this knowledge. So I think that somehow talking about history of science is somehow a way to connect myself with my roots, through something that somehow I can trace. I know that, okay, this Arab guy wrote this and translate this book, okay, based on this Egyptian scholar that was in contact with this guy from Nubia, and then somehow there's some connections. And because of the Arabic presence in Portugal, Brazil has a lot of this influence. So a lot of words in Portuguese are derived from Arabic. So there's a connection with Brazil. And during our history, a lot of Lebanese and other populations from Arabic, from different Arabic countries, come to Brazil. So it's very common, like to find like Lebanese food and and meet with Lebanese people here in Brazil. So for me, it was something that just the topic appeared. That was like in my radar because okay, I was watching and reading about history of science. But what really get me connected with this specific period of time is that how important this period was for Europe. A lot of scholars say that without these Arabic scholars and their translations and their like books that they create, we probably won't had the Renaissance and a lot of discovery we had through the Renaissance and after the Renaissance. But when I learn history here in Brazil, their history is very like Eurocentric, very focused in Europe. So I have no clue about this. So I think that somehow is important to, okay, that's a lot of other people doing science, doing history, doing art in the world. And even like the way as we look to the history, talking about like antiquity and then Middle Ages and then Renaissance, this division, there works only when you think about Europe. When you look like to China is like have dynasties that take 1,000 years and they don't see them like in the Bronze Age or something like that. So
yeah, you're so right, and that's so profound that this game in some ways helps link you back to your roots, but this issue that I think it's just true of all of us. This issue that you have with Eurocentric history, it's certainly true of the United States. It's not even Eurocentric history. It's really Western Europe only.
Yes.
I was with some friends from Poland. We don't until 1939 when Germany invades Poland. I swear to you, Poland is never mentioned in an American history book. Even though it actually has this enormous role in the Middle Ages and all the rest of it. But whatever, we're not worried about it. It's England, France, Spain, Germany. The end, pretty much.
Yeah.
Luis, your game. What's remarkable about your game is it's really about personal history down to the individual level, and we don't get a lot of gaming we get a lot of gaming at the god level, right? You know, the whole world, well, that's what I do. The whole world is your, you know, your playground, blah, 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 move tanks around, switch resources. And you have designed a game really about a very tragic experience that individuals, it's not an experience unique to Mexico, but it obviously has been an important part of modern Mexican history. And why do you think it's important to focus at that level, or what are the advantages of telling history at that level?
Well, one of the focus that I wanted to take when starting this project was to allow people or help people realize that these stories were things that were happening to human beings. I think that here in Mexico, it's very easy to disregard a news article about a clandestine grave that appeared somewhere near a community, just because we have heard so much of it. Like, there comes a point in which violence just seems like a normal thing, and it shouldn't. It really shouldn't. Like, we have more than 100,000 disappeared people, and it's a humanitarian crisis that many of the communities in my country are living through. So I wanted to make like a cultural object that could be used to help people realize that all of these barbaric things were happening to human beings. And well, it's also very important for me, or during the creation of this game, to also to focus most of the game on the personal experience and how people are affected, but not shy away on telling how systemic issues come to impact people in Mexico, and I'm sure everywhere in the world. Like, especially things like the economic interests of the United States, how they greatly affect which are the communities targeted by, the organized crime. Because I think that we, as a community, like a gaming community, we like to think about colonialism in terms of its past. We like to analyze how it affected us, throughout history, but we don't often stop to realize how colonialism helped shape the world that we live in, and even maybe how it is still affecting us, and how there are colonial powers that still profit from all of this. I was, for example, very very interested to see how very few people in the gaming world talk about Palestine throughout everything that has been happening, like how that occupation has it's a reflection of things we have seen here in Latin America, of things we're still seeing in other places, how the structures that are economic, the ways in which we produce new things affect people in El Congo. I think that we as gamers have the possibility to use all of the things that we have created, all of these game mechanisms, to tell us stories that are very important and very specific of our modern times. Because in the end, the beautiful thing about war games is that the machine in which they run are human beings. We sit in a table and we share these stories. So to me, it was very important to be able to share the stories of someone who needed their stories to be shared. And that's the main focus that I have been trying to achieve with my game.
Well, that is an extraordinarily noble exercise that you undertook. Do you think that what we do in historical game design, where we sort of frequently or classically reduce people and conflicts to like chits and die rolls, do you think does it have a danger of dehumanization? And how does your game deal with this problem of abstracting something that's very personal?
Well, I don't necessarily think that it's a huge problem, but I think that we need to realize that it's also very, well, Eurocentric, or like they were saying, because in the end, we are seeing many games that focus on a very logistical and very big, like what you said, the God level of thinking about conflicts. So we are often put on the shoes of superpowers such as the United States or Russia or any European power. And this is a thing that maybe it's not bad, because we can learn an awful lot from that, such is the case with Young Company, for example. But the thing is that we need to realize that we are doing that we are taking a perspective of the people who were seeing all of the world like a game, and not of everyone else who was affected by it. So I really think that we can, well, spaces like the Zenobia Awards are great to bring in people from diverse backgrounds to tell their stories, because I feel like there's so much to be told, and we can learn an awful lot just by listening and giving other people a chance to talk, to show their perspective that we wouldn't know if they don't do it, if we don't allow them to do.
I totally agree. And in general, I think as the hobby has diversified and grown across the world and incorporated more women, more people of color, more people from other countries, the gaming has gotten better. Game design has gotten better. People are taking new approaches. People are bringing new topics to the table, and all of that has just made the hobby a richer thing to participate in. Frager, I wanted to ask a little bit, because you're in Amsterdam, which is certainly one of the hubs of the hobby. But the Europeans have a way of using, Mesoamerica, Latin American themes and sort of pasting them on from our point of view, I would say, from most historical gamers' point of view. Do you think, what's your attitude towards that kind of approach to Latin America in game design? Is it okay? Is it cool to just like celebrate Latin American themes at a very superficial level, or do you think that it sort of it hides or whitewashes history? What's your take?
Yeah, it's it's complicated. It's a little complex, yes. But I think that there are games that just put like some Latin America theme on top, just to. I think that like one game that is the Quest for El Dorado. This game is a deck building racing game. Could be any team. It's just okay. That's nothing. But other games like Teotihuacan, they have a little research, so they try to somehow unveil. But I think that my position about these games, I think that most of these games, they are more the designers are more connected on design a good puzzle to play, and even when they do a research, they don't like let any of this research appear in the game. So the cards don't have names. They're like, so everything is very like, even when the team is like in Europe, is like Newton, like all the cards, like all the stuff don't have names, don't have titles. You put books in the shelf, but which book is just a tile? So I think that there are a lot of reasons why. I was talking to some publishers in the Nuremberg Toy Fair, and they are saying, "Oh, we didn't do any game about wars, because yes, Second World War was very, very traumatic for Germany and for our most countries here in Europe. So they don't want to talk about war. And I think that this somehow, or they take in history, they prefer kind of, okay, this game is about this period of time, but they don't put like a lot of information, a lot of details, somehow to have some distance. I don't know. And as I told that a lot of games are being launched talking about Abbasid Caliphate and Baghdad and this period of time. But when you look at the games, they have cards, they have like the scholars there, but the scholars don't have names. They don't have like the action, the language they translate, and they... So I think that somehow, I don't know if they are afraid of, okay, I do this research and or they are committed to just the puzzle, just to make this engine working, this system working. So this doesn't matter how well this system are representing my research. And for me, it's very quite the opposite, because I start with the research. I start with reading the books, and then after that, I try to think about something. Even like I play a lot of these Euro games, and or my like most of my collection are of this kind of games. So I really like these games that are very elegant, very simple mechanics. And my game is still, even being a historical game, somehow it's very similar to the Euro game. It's very clean. It's very condensed, trying to be elegant. This term was like a thing like 50 years ago. So nowadays, people just want to launch games with thousands of cards and a lot of and combos. So that's not a thing anymore. But so I think that I think that the main issue for me is how the approach to design the game. I think that when we start with research, it's easier to talk about anything in a more respectful way, because you do your research, and your research is not only like reading books. You have to talk to people to, okay, who knows this topic and can help me somehow? Who can put me like in the way to read the good books about this? Because you have a lot of books. If I want to make a game about, I don't know, the optics and how our eye works, I can read only the European books and talk only about Newton, and forget that like 3 centuries earlier than Newton, Arab scholar wrote almost the same thing as Newton.
Right, you figured it out way before. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so even like in our research, it's important to look, and for me, it was very helpful when they talk about like these scholars here in Brazil that help me and point me for some books. Okay, read this book, read this book, read this book. And because they give us different approach. Because if I stay just with my preliminary, like the first book that I met, I won't talk about how the Arabs help Europe. So it's always about Europe in the end. But when I broaden my research, okay, it's not about them. Like they become like they somehow benefit, but it's not like the intent. The intent that they are improving their own lives, and they are, for them, that's very connect. And when we think about Latin America, I think that is the same. In Brazil, we don't have like people design and publishing historical games. We have some games with Brazilian teams and some games that somehow try to pose as historical. And we have like a really heavy hit launched in Brazil, the game called Brazil. Brazil Imperial was a big hit, like in not only in Brazil, but in the world. Dice Tower got like his seal of approval. But it's a Euro game, and the game like has the manual with the rules, but had another book another manual with a little history. But even that, this when you look to this research is okay, it's history, but 30 years ago is not like a new research with new scholars with a new approach. So it's very colonizing. It's a very Eurocentric view yet. So I think that even when the designers try to put, okay, no, it's based in the history, it's still, if you don't broaden your research, if you don't talk with people that are, and I think that is very important. Like you have to research and the more contemporaneous books, the more the contemporaneous scholars. If you look only for the books wrote like 15 years ago, you'll get all the same point of view. And
I totally agree. Honestly, I mean, first of all, it's a beautiful game, so it was very nicely produced. But at the time it came out in the United States, we were having a very serious discussion in the historical game community about how we deal with imperialism and how it should be portrayed in games. And that game came out and basically did all the things that most Americans were saying, oh, we need to stop doing this. But because it came from a Brazilian, people left it alone. But I think it might have been a disservice. But there is also this other problem that, people's attitude towards imperialism is not the same in every country. And Brazil has its own perception of its own history. And, some things that the people in Brazil might celebrate, other countries might think, well, that wasn't such a great thing that happened, but you guys are excited about it. God knows that happens with Americans all the time. And so, that's just part of translating experience from one culture to another. Federico, Wagner was talking a little bit about this issue in European design where they won't include detail in a game design. They won't name cards. They won't name names. Everything has a kind of a generic gloss. And one of the objectives that both when I was in Zenobia, working as a mentor in Zenobia and also just in game design in general, since Americans don't know anything about their history and they don't know anything about how their government runs and they don't know anything about anybody else's history, I am constantly trying to spoon feed it as best I can. That is part of what I'm trying to do with design. It seems to me that you're doing a little bit of that yourself with your design. Tell me a little bit about what you think games can teach, what they teach well, and why this kind of educational lesson was important in your game.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think within the space of play, I think it's possible to give at least a simplified model of what were the historical dynamics. And this is, it's a much better way to learn or to understand the players or some of the players, the historical players, than just reading a book. In my own experience with games I have played, it has been like that. So if the designer, which is a big if in my case, but if the designer manages to represent in a simplified but in a faithful way what were the important dynamical factors in that led to the behaviors of the different actors, then I think it can be maybe it's not my main aim is not purely logic, also to do something that people can reflect about this time period and eventually find it intellectually stimulating. But I do believe that there is that as Fagner said, only the newer books, in fact, tell you the history in a less one-dimensional way, and then I think that games have a role to play in that, in this like expanding the space of descriptions, and expanding the points of views in a way. And I definitely try to do that in my game, and maybe I was too ambitious. Like I try to include many points of view, like, or many actors that could like, and try to see how their incentives could interact. And of course there is like you need to compromise like the level of detail that you want to enter, and you like your model has to be simple enough that you can play it in 2-3 hours, and this is something that I'm struggling with, but I find this is a very unique and very interesting and not enough exploited way of exploring history, definitely. And it's something that I already appreciated, and I learned so much, or I feel I learned so much, and sometimes, well, like in Twilight Struggle, like you can like go into it with what was the perception that the actors had in that time, and independently of what is the historical vision we have today from that, from how realistic this perception was. And I think this is very like an amazing way of exploring like why things happen the way it happens, and I think it's I try to do something.
It's a super interesting question. This this weird problem in game design where sometimes you have to warp history in order to get players to be in the because we know what. Yeah, but to put the player in the mindset of the participant, you have to like distort the view of history, so it's fuzzy like the participants was. Anyway, it's a weird problem to deal with in design. We're coming up on time. Not that it doesn't really matter. We could go all day, but I want to be respectful. But before we go, I know you're all designers, and now that you've got a game or two under your belt, you probably can't stop thinking about game designs. So tell me, we'll start with you, Frederico, go the other way. What in the back of your head is a great subject that has not yet been explored and you're thinking about a game?
Yeah, I have an idea of a game. It's a complicated idea, so I don't know if I will ever. But there is this historical person, Lord Ponsonby, and he basically created Uruguay, my country. And he basically created Belgium. Like it's like it was a similar situation historically, but there were like 15 years in between these two occurrences. Like in Uruguay, the case of Uruguay, like there was kind of like it was not clear if it would be part of Argentina or of Brazil. And of course, the British were like, yeah, maybe we want something independent and small. And with Belgium, the same thing happened. And it was the same person that was like doing the negotiations. So I was thinking of a game where you, like a bit inspired in Red Flag Over Paris. So you would have like different areas of conflict, and the British would try to do something, and there would be another player trying to like play the role of a big power trying to go in a different direction. And the difficult part would be like that, the things that like Ponsonby does, like he can learn from his experience. So like what he does in Uruguay can give him power to do things later in Belgium. That's the part that I'm not totally sure how to do it, but that's what I would like to do. Yeah.
Super interesting. That'd be an amazing game. Get to work.
Thank you.
Wagner.
Yeah, I have some topics that I'm starting researching, but one of them it's a game about in a new research discovering that in Amazon region in Brazil, some islands through the Amazon River are artificial. They are made by indigenous people like 100 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, they are amazing. Like nowadays they have like a lot of soil and like big trees on that, but they are built because the ground there is not from their region or the other parts. So it's very interesting. So I think that this can make something interesting, but I have no idea how to make a game about this. But it's a topic that I'm researching about. But it's a new topic being researched. So just a few papers to read. So I'm still trying to find more about it. And I'm two other topics that I'm interested at. My game House of Wisdom, doing this research, I read about a lot of different books that these Arabic scholars created. So I think about make a card game about one of these books. That is the Book of Ingenious Devices. So three brothers, the Musa brothers, make up this book with a lot of different mechanic things. And I think about make a light card game based on this book. And I'm still working on how exactly this will work. And the other is other topic that I'm really interested in about history of religion, not only science. And I was watching and read a lot about how our modern religion, how they gods got their names. So I looking this and looking how like El was a god and then become mixed together with Yahweh, and then so I want to make a game about this history, how you start like after the collapse of the Bronze Age with all different gods and polytheist religions, and then with the time this god mixes, the names get together, and in the same like book, religious book, you have a lot of different names, so a lot of different gods, but no, it's not a polytheism, it's just only one god, and how this works. And I think about how can make a 4X game, but not like with war with tanks or armies fighting, but with
Spaceships usually.
yeah, but people converting to their faith and mixing and make a new mythology, mixing mythologies, and still thinking about and still in the beginning of research. But I think that was a very interesting topic.
Super interesting. Never really been explored. So it would be fantastic to have a game in that subject. On the list of things that Americans don't really know very much about, you can add their religion, because they all believe in Christianity and they believe in the Bible, but they don't really have a strong sense of any of the history that precedes those things. So
I think that one thing that Christianity lost to the time, but Islamic and Jewish religion keep, is that on their books you can look and see, okay, this part of the book was wrote by this Rabbi in this period of time, and this other part is this other period of time. So you can see this different conflict and these different parts. But in the Christian Bible, these are erased, so we don't know that this one book in fact was like a lot of parts together.
Exactly.
So, and this is very interesting. So this really
sometimes written centuries apart and all the rest of it, and people don't know.
And this make is it explain to us why we have a lot of contradictions.
Exactly.
Because of this, this period of time make more sense to write this way because we are in a drought, it's very difficult. Right. Oh no, now this time everything is good, or food, everyone is happy, so we can write this way. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, those are exciting projects. Luis, what's next?
Well, I'm not very sure on the historical point of view. However, I recently read a book that made me realize I would be very interesting on making or giving my take on the Mexican Revolution, because there are a couple of very important games. Like here in Mexico, there's a game called Tierra y Libertad.
I played it. Quite a good game.
Yeah, it's very nice, as well as Pax Porfiriana as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there are very well loved takes. However, I will be very interested on doing the Mexican Revolution from the perspective of ideology, because all of the different people who participated in there had very different motivations. And as a historical event, it really fascinates me because it's a revolution in which actually worked, in which the revolution sort of won. However, the people who needed to be like together in the right moment were not able to do so. And then everything fell apart. And then the narrative of the revolution became something completely different that actually made the country go backwards in a way. So I feel like to explore the ideological consequences of the revolution and of its different actors would be a very cool game.
I totally agree. I mean, what we have so far, I think, on the Mexican Revolution is, while I love both Pax Porfiriana and Tierra Libre, it's Land and Freedom, Freedom Land, whatever the structure of that phrase in Mexico or in Spanish is. It's kind of like different colors and everybody's the same ideal, or you might have a leading character, but you don't get any real sense of the ideological structure or struggle and what's actually at stake for Mexico's future, what people are fighting about. They're just fighting, which is easy enough to do. I mean, American Civil War games are the same. It's blue and gray. Does it really matter? Not really. It's just counters versus counters. So it would be cool to have a game about Mexican history that delved into that further. Well, gentlemen, we are a little bit over time, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I so enjoyed meeting all three of you, and I learned quite a bit, and I hope everybody else tuning in enjoyed it as much as I did. Best of luck on all your future endeavors, and I hope to see you at conventions and be purchasing your games soon.
Thank you very much, Jason. It was really good. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason, for having us, and thank you, Luis and Federico. It was a really good time to have you guys too.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah, thank you as well. It was very, very cool to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Ciao, ciao.